Picture this. A gravel pull-off on a back road you've driven 100 times. Spanish moss dragging low from the oak trees. The kind of thick, warm southern night where the air itself feels like it's breathing. Your car is parked under the canopy, engine off, the only sound the ticking of metal cooling and the distant tree frogs going about their business in the dark. You're 25 years old. You just got back from the war. You survived things overseas that you have worked very hard not to think about. And tonight is just easy. Good music from the radio. Someone you care about sitting beside you. The world, for once, feeling like it might be okay. Then a light hits you directly in the eyes. Blinding white, coming from somewhere outside the passenger window. You throw your arm up instinctively, and then the knocking. Heavy, deliberate. 3 hard raps against the driver's side glass, the kind that don't sound like a question. You roll the window down. The face looking back at you is not a face. It is a white burlap sack, roughly cut, with 2 uneven holes where the eyes should be. And below it, pressed against the open window frame, cold and absolutely steady, is the barrel of a .32 caliber pistol pointed directly at your head. In the split second before your brain catches up with what your body already knows, one thought surfaces above the terror. There is no one out here to hear you. This happened. Not in a screenplay. Not in the opening pages of a dime store horror novel. This happened on the night of February 23rd, 1946, on a deserted stretch of road outside a border town that straddled Texas and Arkansas, a town that, before that night, had been trying very hard to believe the worst was behind them. What followed across the next 10 weeks was one of the most psychologically devastating crime sprees in American history. A sequence of murders so precisely executed, so deliberately theatrical, so completely unpunished that it rewrote the American understanding of what a serial killer could be. Not a sick drifter, not a random maniac, a predator. Disciplined, patient, and fully aware of the effect his existence was having on the community he hunted in. The Texarkana Phantom Killer, sometimes called the Moonlight Murderer. The man who invented the mask before the mask became a horror movie cliché. Tonight, we are driving back into that dark, rain-soaked spring. We are going to every crime scene, through every investigation, every suspect, every failure of justice, and the single most unsettling fact about this case that almost nobody talks about. The Phantom was never caught, and by every indication available to investigators, he simply chose to stop, which means he chose to start. Welcome to Midnight Whispers. If this is your first ride with us, hit subscribe and turn on every notification, because this is what we do every week, and we go all the way in every time. Let's go back to Texarkana. You cannot understand the psychological devastation of what happened in Texarkana without first understanding what Texarkana was in early 1946 and what the entire country had just come through. World War II had ended the previous year. The liberation, the relief, the sheer collective exhale of a nation that had been holding its breath for 4 years was still reverberating through every small American town. Young men were coming home. Factories were transitioning from munitions back to washing machines and automobiles. The suburbs were beginning to bloom. The cultural mythology of the safe, peaceful, ordered American life, the backyard, the church on Sunday, the corner drugstore, was being constructed in real time, with intention, almost as an antidote to everything the war had shown the world was possible. Texarkana fit neatly into this picture. A twin city straddling the state line, with State Line Avenue running literally down the middle. Texas on one side, Arkansas on the other. Population around 50,000. Dense pine forests on the outskirts. Dark swamplands further in, and threading through all of it. A network of unpaved logging roads and gravel pull-offs that served a specific social function for the young people of the community. Privacy. They called them lovers' lanes. Every town had them. Dark, quiet stretches of road where couples could park after a movie, away from parents and curfews and the general surveillance of small-town life. They were, in 1946, the only form of freedom available to a 20-year-old who didn't own a private space. And in a town surrounded by miles of dark timber, there was no shortage of them. This is where the Phantom chose to hunt, and the choice was not random. He wasn't selecting victims by name or personal grudge. He was selecting conditions: isolated, dark, No witnesses, no escape route. Young people who would be too terrified to fight back and too humiliated, in the social climate of 1946, to immediately report what had happened to them. He understood the psychology of his hunting ground before he ever set foot in it. We know this because of what he did the first time. The nightmare officially opened on the damp night of February 23, 1946. Jimmy Hollis was 25, a veteran just finding his footing back in civilian life. His girlfriend, Mary Jean Larry, was 19. They'd been to a movie, and they'd parked on a secluded gravel turnoff on Richmond Road. A road Jimmy knew, a road that felt safe in the way that familiar things feel safe before something changes them forever. The light hit Jimmy's windshield first, a powerful handheld spotlight, the kind that law enforcement used. Jimmy's first thought, and this detail matters, was that it was a local deputy. In 1946, in a small southern town, a cop shining a light on a parked car at night was not only plausible, it was expected. He rolled the window down to comply. The face he saw instead would stay with him for the rest of his life. White burlap, roughly sewn, the eye holes cut at different heights, giving the mask a crooked, inhuman asymmetry that was somehow worse than a face expressing emotion. A .32 caliber pistol, a voice, flat, graveled, unhurried, that issued a single instruction. Get out of the car, Jimmy tried to reason with him. Veterans do that. They try to assess and negotiate before reacting. He stepped out with his hands visible, speaking calmly, trying to read the situation. The masked man pistol-whipped him across the skull with enough force to fracture the bone in 2 places. Jimmy hit the gravel and didn't get up. What the Phantom did next tells us something important about who he was. He didn't search the car. He didn't look for keys. He turned immediately to Mary Jean Larry and ordered her out of the vehicle. He told her to run into the woods. This was not robbery. This was sport. Mary ran. She ran with everything she had. Briars catching her clothes, branches across her face, the absolute blind terror of someone running in the dark, not knowing what's behind them. And the Phantom followed without hurrying. He caught her. He assaulted her brutally with the barrel of his pistol before walking back into the tree line as if he had completed a task. Both Jimmy and Mary survived. And when they described the attacker to police, a man in a burlap sack, calm, deliberate, not interested in robbery, the investigators struggled to process it. It didn't fit any known profile. It sounded like something out of a pulp fiction magazine. The police filed it as an isolated assault by an unknown transient. They failed to understand that they had just witnessed a predator announcing himself. He would give them exactly 4 weeks to figure it out. He always operated on a cycle of approximately 4 weeks. Almost. Like the cycle of the moon. March 24th, 1946. One lunar cycle after Richmond Road. The weather had turned cold again. Spring in East Texas is deceptive. Warm 1 week, raw the next. Richard Griffin was 29. A veteran like Jimmy Hollis. His girlfriend, Polly Ann Moore, was 17, a high school student, a girl whose parents were presumably asleep at a reasonable hour waiting for her to come home. They parked on an isolated stretch of Highway 67 known locally as a reliable lover's lane, remote enough to feel private, familiar enough to feel safe. A truck driver discovered their car at dawn, parked neatly at the shoulder, no obvious damage, no skid marks. He approached to check on the occupants the way a decent person would, thinking maybe they'd broken down or fallen asleep. What he found ended any possibility of this being written off as a random incident. Richard and Polly had been shot at point-blank range in the backs of their heads. They were still seated, still wearing their coats. The precision of it. The clinical, unhurried, methodical nature of 2 execution-style shots was not the signature of an impulsive attacker. This was someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had thought about it in advance. Outside the car, the ground told the rest of the story. A massive pool of coagulated blood in the mud, footprints in the dirt, evidence that both victims had been dragged from the vehicle, subjected to violence, and then placed back inside. The physical arrangement of the scene. The bodies returned to the seats, the car still on the shoulder, suggested something that made the investigators deeply uncomfortable. A sense of staging, of presentation. The Phantom wasn't just committing murders. He was composing them. .32 caliber shell casings recovered from the mud matched the caliber used at Richmond Road 5 weeks earlier. The Twin Cities of Texarkana received the news the way a body receives a diagnosis it already suspected. The denial was over. There was a serial killer working these roads. He was armed, masked, methodical, and he had killed 2 people in a town where nothing like this was supposed to happen. The task force assembled across both sides of the state line. Sheriff's deputies from Bowie County, Texas, and Miller County, Arkansas, began coordinating. Warnings were issued to local high schools. Parents were told. Lovers' lanes were mapped. And the Phantom watched the response, somewhere in the pine trees, and waited for 3 more weeks. April 14th, 1946. 3 weeks after Griffin and Moore. Betty Jo Booker was 17 years old and played saxophone in a local musical group called the Rhythmaires. She was, by all accounts, one of those people that a town like Texarkana produces occasionally. Bright, warm, genuinely liked by everyone who knew her. The kind of girl who made the rooms she walked in to feel a little more alive. That night, the Rhythmaires had a late performance. Paul Martin, 15, picked her up afterward. Betty Jo had her heavy brass saxophone case in the back seat. They drove off, promising their families they were heading straight home. By morning, it was clear they hadn't made it. Paul Martin's car was found abandoned on the shoulder of North Robeson Road at 6:30 a.m., its headlights still burning into the empty woods. Paul himself was discovered over a mile away, lying in a roadside ditch, shot multiple times. The shots showed evidence of a pursuit. He had not been killed where the car was parked. He had run or been chased, and the Phantom had followed him into the dark and finished it. The search for Betty Jo Booker consumed the entire morning. Texas Rangers, local deputies, tracking dogs, and hundreds of ordinary citizens moved through the dense brush in an expanding grid. They found her hours later, hidden behind a cluster of trees deep in the woods. Executed with the same .32 caliber weapon, the same point-blank range, the same clinical efficiency. But the saxophone was gone. The Phantom had taken Betty Jo Booker's saxophone as a souvenir. This single detail, this deliberate, calculated collection of a trophy from a murdered 17-year-old girl, shifted something fundamental in the way investigators understood what they were dealing with. Trophy collection is one of the clearest behavioral signatures of a certain type of organized predator. Someone whose crimes are not impulsive releases of violence, but deliberate experiences to be savored and revisited. He had carried that heavy brass instrument out of those woods in the dark. He had wanted something to keep. And then the investigators noticed something else, something that none of them who worked the case ever fully forgot. When they processed Paul Martin's abandoned car on the shoulder of North Robeson Road, the vehicle's radio was still on. In the silence of that early East Texas morning, with 2 murdered teenagers in the woods and a brass saxophone missing from the earth, Paul Martin's car radio was sputtering out a faint, staticky stream of big band jazz music into the empty air. Sweet, brassy horns crackling through the static, playing to no one as the sun came up over the pines. The investigators stood there and listened to it for a moment before someone reached in and turned it off. Some of them never talked about that detail in the years that followed. Some of them brought it up every time someone asked about the case. It's the kind of image that doesn't leave you. Not because it's grotesque, but because it's so precisely, unbearably wrong. Music playing where there should be silence. Life where there is none. The effect on Texarkana was total and immediate. Hardware stores ran out of deadbolts within 48 hours. Gun shops cleared their ammunition shelves. Citizens nailed wooden boards over their windows. Families who had lived in the same house for 20 years found themselves checking the locks 2 and 3 times before bed. Streets that had been full of post-war optimism went completely dark by 6 in the evening. Restaurants closed early. Churches moved services to daylight hours. A psychological curfew, unspoken, unlegislated, absolute, had been imposed on an entire community. If you were on the road after dark, you were either law enforcement or you were taking your life into your own hands. And the Phantom watched all of it, and he adjusted. The governor of Texas recognized that local law enforcement was being outmaneuvered by a predator who understood the terrain better than they did. He made a call. Captain Manuel T. Gonzalez, known throughout Texas law enforcement by his earned nickname, Lone Wolf, was dispatched to Texarkana. Gonzalez was not a figure that the history of American crime tends to produce twice. A 30-year veteran of the Texas Rangers, he had survived more armed confrontations than most officers even encountered in their careers. He wore custom pearl-handled revolvers on both hips. Not for showmanship, but because in the world he operated in, that kind of thing was occasionally necessary. He had an instinct for criminal psychology that his colleagues described as almost uncanny. The ability to place himself inside the logic of a predator and move from there. When he arrived in Texarkana, the FBI had already deployed agents. Dozens of local and state police were working around the clock. The media from New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles had descended on the town. Press photographers were staking out crime scenes, and the Phantom had not been seen, caught, or credibly identified. Gonzalez looked at the map of the Lovers' Lanes and understood the fundamental problem immediately. Traditional patrol was useless. The Phantom wasn't operating on a schedule that could be interrupted by a passing cruiser. He was selecting his locations and his nights with care, and a police car visible on a dark road simply meant he chose a different road that night. He had time. He had patience. He could wait. So Gonzalez built a trap. He selected his youngest, most physically unremarkable officers, men and women who could pass as teenagers in the dark, and he dressed them in civilian clothes. He placed them in unmarked cars, sent them out into the deepest and most isolated lovers' lanes, and told them to park, cut the engine, and wait. Inside each car, hidden beneath coats and under seats, were loaded shotguns. The officers were told to let the Phantom make his approach, to wait for the knock on the glass, to wait for the burlap mask to appear, before acting. The psychological reality of sitting in that bait car night after night deserves to be acknowledged directly. These were real human beings, sitting alone or in pairs in complete darkness, in the middle of nowhere, in a pine forest where a masked executioner was known to be operating. Every crack of a branch, every shift in the wind, every shadow that crossed the rearview mirror at the wrong angle. The tension inside those cars, over the weeks they ran the operation, must have been almost physically unbearable. A sustained, full-system adrenal alert that never got a release. The bait cars ran for weeks. The Phantom never approached. He had made the same calculation that Gonzalez made, from the other side. He understood that the lanes were compromised. He could sense the change. The texture of the night was wrong. The body language of the couples in the parked cars was wrong. Something in the pattern had shifted. Whether it was genuine tactical intelligence or something closer to animal instinct, the result was the same. He changed his hunting ground entirely. While the bait cars sat empty in the dark lanes, the city itself was coming apart at the seams. The sustained paranoia had weaponized the community against itself. A man buying burlap at a farm supply store was reported to the FBI within the hour. A neighbor seen walking after dark was confronted at gunpoint by 3 different households on the same street. 2 innocent men were shot at by homeowners who mistook them for the Phantom. 1 was wounded. A woman reported her husband to police as the primary suspect based solely on the fact that he seemed too calm about the murders. An entire community, united by fear of an outsider, had turned its terror inward and begun consuming itself. The Phantom watched the trap fail from wherever he was watching from, and he made his final move. May 3rd, 1946. Far outside the city limits, where the pines give way to open farmland, stood a modest single-story house surrounded by dark cornfields. Virgil Starks, 37 years old, worked this land. He was not a young couple on a lover's lane. He was not a teenager at a musical performance. He was a farmer in his living room, in his own chair, reading the evening newspaper in his own home while his wife Katie prepared for bed. At approximately 9 o'clock, Virgil's back was turned to the large front window that faced the cornfield. The curtains were not drawn. There was no reason to draw them. This was his house, his road, his field. He had done nothing wrong. He was not in the wrong place. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. 2 shots came through the window glass from outside. Both struck Virgil Starks in the back of the head. He died instantly, his newspaper sliding down his lap. Katie heard the shots and ran in from the kitchen. She saw her husband, and before she could fully process what she was seeing, 2 more shots came through the broken window, striking her in the face, shattering her jaw and her teeth. What happened next is one of the most remarkable acts of survival instinct in this entire case. Katie Starks, with her jaw fractured, bleeding badly, barely able to see, did not freeze. She ran. Out the front door, barefoot, into the dark mud of the cornfield, moving by memory toward the nearest neighbor's house a quarter-mile away. She did not know if the phantom was behind her. She ran anyway. He was behind her. Police later reconstructed the sequence from the boot prints tracked through the house. The phantom had come in through the kitchen screen door after the shooting. He had walked through the house. His footprints circled Virgil's body in the living room. He had tracked Katie's blood through the hall toward the front door. At some point, he had realized she had already reached the field and gone. He left nothing behind. No fingerprints, no weapon, no witness who could identify him. He had come through the window, walked around a dead man, and dissolved back into the dark cornfield as cleanly as he had appeared. The Starks attack destroyed the last psychological defense that Texarkana's citizens had been clinging to. Before this, there had been at least the possibility of safety through behavior modification. Don't park on dark roads. Don't be out after sundown. Don't put yourself in vulnerable positions. It was a small comfort, but it was something. The phantom had just demonstrated that there was no behavior modification that would protect you. He would find you in your living room. He would look through your window while you sat in your chair. The farmhouse made clear that the only safe position in Texarkana, Texas in May of 1946 was to not exist. And then, nothing. The moon rose in June. The moon rose in July. The summer settled over Texarkana with its usual heat and humidity, and the burlap mask did not appear again. No more shell casings, no more body arrangements, no more livestock disturbed, no more screen doors torn open in the night. The phantom had executed 8 people across 10 weeks, terrorized a city of 50,000 into locking itself inside at sundown, embarrassed every level of law enforcement in 2 states, and then simply stopped. This is the detail that separates the Texarkana case from most serial crime investigations. And it is also the detail that the history books tend to move past too quickly. He didn't get caught. He wasn't killed. There was no dramatic confrontation, no deathbed confession, no tip from a reliable informant. He ceased operations as deliberately as he had begun them, and no one has ever satisfactorily explained why. Organized predators who stop killing without external cause are rare. When it happens, there are typically a small number of explanations: incarceration on an unrelated charge, relocation out of the area, severe illness or death, or, most disturbingly, a conscious decision to stop. A choice made by someone who was fully in control of their behavior the entire time. The latter possibility is what keeps the Texarkana case alive in the minds of investigators and true crime researchers 70+ years later. Because if he chose to stop, then the question becomes, what did he have left to prove? What had the experience given him that he no longer needed? What had 8 murders and a community reduced to paranoid ruin accomplished for whoever was behind that mask? There is no comfortable answer. In 1947, roughly a year after the murders stopped, investigators focused on a man named Yuli Swinney. Swinney was 40 years old, a career criminal with a specific specialty: car theft. He was smooth, personable, intelligent in the way that certain manipulative personalities present as intelligent. Good at reading rooms, good at telling people what they wanted to hear, and possessed of a history of escalating violence that made him a credible fit for a profile that was still being developed. The case against him came, almost entirely, from one source: his wife. Peggy Swinney approached investigators voluntarily, and what she offered was extraordinary. She provided detailed, specific accounts of Yule returning home on the nights of the murders with blood on his clothing. She described his demeanor: calm, almost flat, in the aftermath. She mentioned Betty Jo Booker's saxophone. That detail, withheld from the public and known only to investigators and the killer, was what made the detectives sit up straight. If Peggy Swinney knew about the saxophone, either her husband had told her, or she had seen it. The prosecution believed they had their case. They moved to trial, and then Peggy Swinney invoked her legal right under the marital privilege statute, the protection that, in 1947, prevented a spouse from being compelled to testify against their partner in criminal proceedings. She refused the stand. Without her verbal testimony delivered under oath, the evidentiary case against Yule Swinney collapsed. No fingerprints connected him to the scenes. The .32 caliber pistol was never recovered. The saxophone was never found. Swinney was convicted on unrelated auto theft charges and sentenced to life in prison under a habitual offender statute. He was never formally charged with the Phantom murders. He was released on parole in 1973, rearrested shortly after for violating the terms, and died in custody in 1994. Whatever he knew, he kept. Was Yule Swinney the Texarkana Phantom? The honest answer is, possibly. The circumstantial case is stronger than most people realize, and the saxophone detail, which Peggy provided unsolicited, which matched evidence that was never published, is not easy to dismiss, but possibly is not a conviction. It is not justice for Richard Griffin, Polly Moore, Paul Martin, Betty Jo Booker, or Virgil Starks. It is not an explanation for what happened, or why, or how a man in a burlap sack managed to move through 2 states, through a massive law enforcement response, through bait cars and Texas Rangers and FBI agents, and emerge on the other side as a complete cipher. Alternatively, the real Phantom may have watched Swinney's arrest from wherever he was living his ordinary life, understood that the pressure had been redirected onto someone else, and exhaled with relief. The case is still officially open. Somewhere in East Texas tonight, the road that runs out of Texarkana toward the pine forest is dark the way it has always been dark. The way it was dark in February of 1946, in March, in April, in May, in all the months after when the Phantom had vanished and the community was left to reassemble itself from the pieces. The lovers' lanes still exist, under different names, used by different generations who know the Phantom story the way people know all old local legends, as something that happened to other people in another time before the world was the way it is now. What those stories tend to leave out is the fact that no one was ever convicted, that the mask was never found, that the saxophone has never surfaced, that the man who wore that burlap sack on his face and walked out of the pine trees 8 times in 10 weeks may have lived out the rest of his life in complete anonymity in a house somewhere in East Texas or Arkansas, dying in a bed with his secret intact. The Texarkana Phantom didn't just commit murders, he performed them. He staged them, paced them, escalated them deliberately, changed his hunting ground when the pressure built, and disappeared when he was finished. On his own timeline, for his own reasons, answering to no one. The craft of it is what makes this case genuinely singular in American criminal history. Serial killers who escape detection exist. Serial killers who demonstrate this level of tactical adaptation and then choose their own ending are extraordinarily rare. That's what keeps the lights on at the Texarkana Police Department's cold case desk. Not just the question of who, but the question of why now, and why stop, and what exactly was taking place inside the mind behind that crooked burlap mask when he looked through Virgil Stark's uncurtained window at 9 o'clock on a May night and decided that this was the right moment to act. We don't know. We may never know. And in a case that is now nearly 80 years old, the odds of a resolution narrow with every year that passes, which means the Phantom gets to keep his secret, at least for tonight, now. Drop your theory in the comments. Was Yule Swinney the real face behind the mask? Is there a suspect the official record overlooked? And the most disturbing question of all, what does it mean that he chose to stop? I read every comment, and the sharpest theories shape where this show goes next. Thank you for riding with Midnight Whispers. Lock your doors, draw your curtains, and try not to think too hard about the window that faces your backyard. The one you never bother to curtain because there's nothing out there.